Continuation of urbanism after COVID, part of the globalization summer one classes. Last time we had spoken about the square of opposition. How can we place our own experiences and data within this? We come out of a time, COVID, in which there's so-called a lot of fake news, journalism we can't trust, journalism we should trust but don't know, facts, figures, the extrapolation of facts from values instead of the other way around, us being able to form our own values out of facts. And we'll start with the square of opposition. A continuation of the talk before that is a way to try and get some sort of bearing in our own experiences for you to write your commentaries and your 20 observant blogs on the bigger themes in this class. As always, my method is Socratic. I'm trying to elicit questions rather than answer questions posed. I'm trying to get you to answer your own questions posed. What happened during COVID, what is happening to our cities, what is happening to the economy, what is happening to our food sources, what is happening to the noticeable inflation in food, travel, transportation. I recently tried to rent a car that a couple of years ago was $35, $40 a day, is now close to $200 a day. What is going on with world markets, and how can we place what went on with us during COVID? How is our relative mental health? We're obviously not running an Oprah show here where it's about, witnessing and divesting. It's about a logical way of putting these elements together in more or less a metaphor of a watch, like having these gears fit perfectly instead of the assembly line just attach basic STEM or humanities subjects to you as you chug along on the conveyor belt, and then you're disgorged from an institution which might have a relative state of crisis now. This idea that you go away to this tiny city, utopian community, learn stuff, have the cachet or the legitimacy of learning stuff simply by the physical sighting, and how that has all changed with telepresence, teleeducation, telemedicine, all of these things that are have an intermediary with the screen. In the case of food, petroleum, and housing, can we eat our PowerPoint reports? Can we eat our paper pushing? No, we cannot. So there will be a return, there already is, back to a sense of what infrastructure does, what is infrastructure. This is the square of opposition. It is, we make an assertion, the upper left, on things in our lives. For me, it is the amount of just noticing things, the amount of Zoom meetings I had with colleagues, colleagues doing shows specific in time. I noticed kind of a new tyranny of time, that I was supposedly locked down here, isolated. I put into place a wonderful E.M. Forster story, The Machine Stops, in which this is forecasted over 100 years ago. Very amazing prophetic story where a young man wants to meet his mother. She gave birth to him. He shipped off in some other part of the globe, sort of evenly dispersed. People sort of sit in their little containers or little rooms with these two-way televisions talking to each other. And there they give the equivalent of TED Talks. It's an amazing prophetic story. I had my other classes work on this story, pulling it apart, understanding what was prognosticated that and what is relevant here now today. Tyranny of time, time without space, a feeling of incompletion. While there is a lot of camaraderie, there is little. There's a great sense of alienation. I even noticed with UX and UI, user experience, user interface, that the queuing system, at least in Zoom or the major telephony things, only allowed for sequential conversations. So there was a type of etiquette that was rarely obeyed in the way that sound and conversation might be ambisonic. You might have a conversation over there, you one here, there are breakout rooms, but the ambisonic nature of conversation was something I noticed in the assertion. It was quite frustrating. I used the microphone, which I found cued me immediately, which is kind of an aggressive movement. When I'm online with certain colleagues or conversationalists, that kind of tennis game, which was needed between conversation, was seldom there. The loudest, the most intrusive, jumping in an aggressive way. This was an alienating, aggressive media. Many people became more disappointed with it as time went by because the analog was missing. The ambisonics, the general UX UI was very primitive and linear. And people lost interest. Most people, including myself, would multitask. So there's a difficulty with UX. So UX UI, we've got that gear. We got to put in a workable watch, a workable machine. We add the negation of that. I assert that Zoom, because of its ambisonics, did not quite fulfill the analog. Just that sort of feature within social VR, within Hubs by Mozilla used Hubs. There was an ambisonic feature in which the avatar would come closer to the other avatar in the space, and you could hear dialogue getting louder. So there was a natural sort of aspect of a cocktail party or just a party or a gallery opening where you get closer, further away. You don't use the other attendant macro gestures, micro gestures you would in the analog world. But the UX and UI, my research direction specifically with XR, extended reality, AR, VR, human-computer interfaces. I continue to teach a biomedical engineering class on UX, UI, XR. That was heightened in this VR medium, which you could also use your cell phone. You did not have to have a VR. Okay, proceeding, that was the negative. Assertion, no ambisonics, boo. Negation of that. Ambisonics of a cocktail party are great. You can choose to go over visually stimulated or just curious. You could, or courageous. You could make your move across the floor. Well, what's the non-assertion? Summus is not P. Non-assertion of ambisonics is a fact that some spaces are ambisonic, these VR spaces. Does that add to a greater interest? The ability to decrease kind of an natural ADD or multitasking within the task of looking at a speaker, being aware of macro gestures, micro gestures. To the extent that we're talking about it in this lecture, This is a good way to parse out everything you want to say. This is something that Innes and McLuhan used, the square of opposition. Todorov and Prop continued to use this old Aristotelian device on just finding valid argumentation. All SSP, no SSP, some SSP, some SSP not P. There's a positive side where McLuhan had enhance on the upper left, reverse the trend, retrieve something from an older state, and obsolesce, which is lower right, also following the square of opposition. Moving on. This is your space-time analog dyad, not dyad, monad, moving around the world, potential path areas. You meet with other people. Overlaid is like concepts of modernity. Modernity is pure consumerism. Modernity is pure individuality without society. Modernity as the pure state. Modernity as a construction of personal choice, love, and future self, and everything that might have a primitive analog aspect to it in the individual. Moving on. Tipping point, long-tail, black swan. What we're interested in studying, the tipping point, no, a black swan certainly was COVID-19. Boom, came out of nowhere, changed everything. How did it change everything? We don't know. We can respond to that by the phenomena of the long tail of telepresence using the medium such as Zoom. All of these other things are part of the difficulty. Okay, understand that we already have our watch gear into motion, the sort of Aristotelian square, what UX UI was during COVID, what did it mean to become all screen-based, as an example of the Machine Stops by E.M. Forster. What that means in terms of all of these, there could be a tipping point in this, and I certainly heard rumblings of young people being, even people, young men who had been gamers, completely frustrated by the medium and no longer want to have anything to do with it, want to experience the analog life. Older people, and this is partially a talk about what goes into city in terms of a dyad, a bubble, a relationship of parts going together to make a city. What were the primitive functions of a 6,000-year-old city to make a space? Moving on. I've added this thing that outside of asking questions about the effect of these phenomena, long-tail black swan, tipping point, the sort of function of making a Google search and just, okay, I got the answers. Do we really? Okay, moving on from the data. I devised this thing of how after COVID, at building cities, future of cities, we choose to use aspects of this long tail, mining the long tail. There's a book by both Anderson and Clay Shirky, not together, two separate books. Here Comes Everybody, and Anderson, The Long Tail, which describes as the internet as something which mines the long tail after phenomena. After the phenomena of COVID, there'll be a degree of mining for everything. Jobs, friends, people to date, housing. Everything will be there in the long tail, responding to the giant phenomena, the black swan of COVID. So there's been a reset. The vertical and horizontal aspects here from, I forget right now, the sociologist from the 50s talking about maximizing and satisficing. We talked about this before. How do we satisfice, decide on an aspect of what we're looking for in the long tail: food, jobs, a nice car, a nice apartment, a nice date, a good education, and then how we like the reputation sites out. How do we maximize in the rating systems? Included in most websites are rating systems. Certainly with restaurants in New York, this is open to great debate. Modernity as a mechanism growing out of the American and French Revolution, sort of flavored by the German Enlightenment, mostly with Immanuel Kant, how that traveled into the 19th century under Hegel, then Marx, talking about what the hidden aspects to an economy make of our choice or a perception of free will. And out the other end, roughly, came philosophers, mostly language philosophers, from Wittgenstein onward, and then the Continental School, psychologists coming out of the Freudian tradition, and economists coming out of responding to or totally ignoring the Marxian paradigms out of the 19th century. Again, in time's arrow, these are satisficing, maximizing aspects within this. I've included the little diagonal thing, a game realm, where we enter into games. And we're going to talk a little bit about the dyad that goes into the city to form a game, and what actually happens within a game structures, when we decide to get in and get out, how the modern college became a type of poker game where you ante up into the game, notions of potlatch, notions of sacrifice to play into the game. Is it a rigged game? Is it merely a Ponzi scheme? These things come up. The diagonal line between maximizing and satisficing two distinct states is the game realm, where we decide to play or decide to have one play against us. There again, time's arrow, modernity within this, this general feeling of entropy, how we build cities with a combination of this satisficing and maximizing. Cities are dense and a sort of challenge of space to maximize time, whereas the internet was the use of time to maximize space being all over the world, and what individual choices in satisficing, maximizing, and gameplay we make within this. There again is the use of the using the city to maximize this long tail. And here again is kind of the structures, relationships, the vertical system, subsystem, relationship issues, go, decide, live, immerse, be in it. No more dress rehearsal for what you're doing in life. Whereas the horizontal is desired future, balancing, weighing, judging, not acting, standing outside, design of social change, preparing training, crisis intervention. What are we going to do when we need a used car, or need a rental car, or we need a new job, or we need a new apartment? Are we going to look before we make the vertical decision? And then we enter into game theory, where I'll lead off with the next lecture.